Hey friends, Ryan Smith here, pastor at Common Thread Church. Happy Tuesday to you, Tuesday after Easter. Last week, Common Thread, we followed the steps of Jesus through the Holy Week, what he did each day leading up to his death, his burial, and his resurrection. Yesterday, we talked about kind of the Easter hangover and maybe what happened on the road to Emmaus the day after he comes out of the tomb. Today I want to share another story that happens after the resurrection, and I think this story is slowly becoming one of my favorites in the New Testament. And it's in John chapter 21, if you want to read it fully. But we don't know exactly when it happens after the resurrection, how many days or whatever happened. But it's a powerful story. And if you're familiar with Scripture, if you've looked at the Bible, you know sometimes they have headings at each chapter, what it's about. And this one kind of sometimes says, you know, the reinstation. Jesus reinstating Peter, or you also see Jesus in the miraculous catch of fish. You know, it kind of has different titles. But to truly get this story, you need to understand some of the context, some of the background that's happening in there. And so I want to share that with you right now. And so the story starts off with Peter and some of his friends, and they're sitting around. And you have to remember that Peter was once a fisherman, right? That this is how he lived his life, how he gained money, how he provided for people around him, was he went out and fished and he sold it in the market. And so they're sitting around. You also have to remember Jesus, or Peter, on the day that Jesus died, you know, had that ugly thing where he had 3 opportunities to state that he was a follower of Jesus, that he loved Jesus, but instead he says, I'm not a part of him. He actually curses Jesus. And in that moment, we know that Jesus sees him from across the way, and they see eye to eye. And in that moment, Peter knows that Jesus knows. I have to imagine the shame and guilt that must have felt like at that moment, that this blanket of weight just went on his chest and his heart. And that he'd been carrying that all this time. But at the same time, nothing has changed, and they've been living and the Romans are still in charge. And so Peter says to the guys, he says, I'm going to go fishing. You have to understand, when Peter says, I'm going to go fishing, it's not, hey, I'm going to grab a pole and I'm going to go out and I'm just going to contemplate, I'm going to think I'll have a good time. You know, I just need some quiet time. When Peter says, I'm going fishing, he says, I'm done. You know, we've been doing this thing, and the Romans are still in charge. You know, Jesus was supposed to be the Messiah, but now he died. He died in a horrific way. You know, what am I going to do with life? You know, I've tried. And it just didn't work. And I'm going back to what I know. I'm going back to what is safe. And so he says, I'm going fishing. And a couple of the other guys around him look at him and say, okay, yeah, we're there. We'll join you. And so they get in the boat, they get the nets undone, they go out fishing for the middle of the night, they can't catch anything, they're coming back in the morning, you know, defeated. Can't even do that right, what I used to be able to do, I can't even do that anymore. And they look up on shore, and I imagine there's fog, and it's hard to see. And they hear this guy yell out, and he says, hey, you been fishing, catch anything? No. You know, that's typical for fishermen, we're always asking those things. But then the guy says, hey, throw your nets on this side of the boat, right? And they're like, yeah, whatever, we were out where the fish were, and they're not there, they're not going to be here in the shallows. They throw the net in, they catch all these fish, 153, right? And in that moment, John looks at Peter and says, that's Jesus. And it says that Peter immediately jumps in the water and he begins swimming back to shore to be with Jesus. And the rest of the guys are left with the boat with all these fish, and they're trying to, you know, hold on to the net while they're trying to paddle at the same time, you know, get back to it. And then, you know, it says that in that moment they get there and Jesus says, hey, you guys bring the fish in. I got a fire going and we'll have breakfast. And here's a little side note. So that fire, there's 3 or 4 words for a campfire in the Greek. And there's one specific word that kind of references this kind of a coal fire, you know, a fire that, you know, sometimes I think of like in a barrel, you know, you kind of have something like that where you warm yourself by it. And that word for that coal fire is only used twice in the New Testament when there's other words used for fires. The first time is that when Peter finds himself at the crucifixion, he's standing around a fire and a woman asking him, you know, or a man, I think it's a woman, asking him, you know, do you know this Jesus guy? And he's like, no. He says it 3 times, curses at Jesus 3 times, right? And this same type of fire is set at this moment. And it might be a stretch, but I think Jesus does those things. I think he does intentionally. He sets the atmosphere for what he's about to do. And so I think there's intentionality that this type of fire is set there again. So then it says that they have breakfast together, they eat fish, and I imagine the apostles are hounding Jesus with all these questions. You know, what was it like? Where have you been? What's going on? Just trying to catch up. And it says after they're done eating, Jesus has this intentional moment with Peter. You may have heard this before, but he gives Peter a moment to say 3 times, "Do you love me?" Now you need to understand, I don't believe that Jesus needed to hear that 3 times, right? It wasn't like he was torturing him or whatever. But I think he knew Peter needed to verbally say it 3 times for Peter to truly feel the weight lifted, to feel the shame gone, to feel the guilt, to feel the acceptance, to feel like he's finally worthy again, right? Because we know that Jesus thinks that we're worthy, but we sometimes don't allow ourselves to feel worthy. And here, instead of Jesus saying, "Suck it up, you're worthy," he goes through the intentional, physical, verbal cadence of allowing Peter to do opposite what he did, weeks before. And so in that moment, Jesus allows Peter to feel the love, the compassion, the acceptance back into the family, if you will. But on the last time, Jesus says this to Peter. "Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone will dress you and lead you where you don't want to go." And then the writer explains what he meant. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then Jesus says to Peter, "Follow me." We've heard those words before, right? It's kind of full circle that when Jesus started his ministry, he said those same 2 words, "Follow me." And the disciples, back then the 12 of them said, "Okay, we'll do it." But then they hear these words now, and they know these words, those "follow me" words, they mean so much more, right? They've spent 3 years walking with Jesus, seeing what he teaches, what he says. There's moments where he had opportunities to start riots, to start insurrections, to become the king again. But instead, he teaches of this idea of love, of mercy, of grace, of justice, a third way of living, a way that's going to rage against the machine, but show love that is supernatural. Love that people don't understand so much that they're willing to kill it, right? They're willing to torture it. And so when Jesus says, "Follow me," and Peter hears those words, Peter hears something else. Peter hears, your life, I have so much more for it. That meaningless feeling that you felt, that idea of you just wanting to go back fishing, I want you to live in a way that you will die. I want you to have a life that's worth dying for. And I want you to know that I want you to be a part of something greater than what you're already doing. And that you will suffer for it. But I'm still calling you to it because there's so much beauty in it. And I love this story. There's so much to hear in this story, right? And whether you believe in Jesus or whether you understand, there's this idea that resonates with everyone, this idea of compassion, that we all need the opportunity to be forgiven, to recognize that no matter what I've done, that if Jesus can look at a guy who's supposed to have loved him and then cursed him in his darkest moment and can love him and forgive him, then he can do the same to me, and he can do the same to you. But also, in that moment, he doesn't just say that. He says, "I have something more for you. If you will follow me, you will have a life that might lead to death." But hey, doesn't all life lead to death? And so he doesn't say, "Hey, I want you to come and die with me." He says, "I want you to live like me so that we can change this world together. That I have something more important for you. That I have something that gives you purpose, that gives you a drive, that gives you a mission." And there's times where we get lost and we forget that mission because Peter had been living that mission, but had been deterred by what he chose to do. But Jesus says, just because you chose something different, I'm not done with you. And I want you to hear those words, that Jesus is not done with you, that just because we just celebrated Easter, there's so much more. There's even a point in Jesus when he talks to the disciples, he says, "You are going to do more amazing things than I ever did." And I still can't grasp that. But that is what Jesus is calling us to. is to an intentional life, a purposeful life that is worth dying for. And if you're looking or longing for something like that, Jesus offers it for you. That's what we're trying to figure out at Common Thread. If you're looking for a way to live that out, I want you to hear it's hard to do it by yourself and that you need people around you. And so if you've got a church or a group of people around you that you can join, then I encourage you to do that. If you don't, we have a model where we have people who meet all over the world, some in the UK, some in different parts of the States, where we are encouraging each other and living this thing out together. And if you want to be a part of that, we'd love to share more with you about that. But I want you to hear that Jesus loves you, that he will forgive you. And not only will he forgive you, he will give you a purpose that you never thought could exist in your life. Hope that gives you something to think about, something to wrestle with on this Tuesday. I hope you have a great day. Grace and peace.